Hi, and welcome to Lesson 4 in this series of video lessons for novice machinists. This Lesson 4 is going to be a 2 or 3 part video. Haven't figured that one out yet. But what I do know is that the part 1 is going to be about basic notions. So today we're going to be looking at line types. All the different lines that make up the alphabet of blueprint reading. We're going to be looking at projections. How do we observe a part and put that down onto paper? From what direction do we look at it? That's projections. And we're going to be looking at how to dispose all of this on a sheet of paper to make it readable. And that means views. And that means how many different views of a part are required to show that part in its entirety. And that's quite important to understand. And we're also going to take a look at the type of drawings. And we're talking here about assembly drawings, detail drawings, or combination style drawings. And we're also going to look at some things that are around the drawing. So written notes, some symbols, and things like headers that contain a lot of information in a non-graphic form. And we're going to finish it all up by looking or learning a structured approach to blueprint reading. How to make it through a blueprint and ensure at the same time that you haven't missed any important information. But before we get into the meat of the subject, let's take a few minutes to take a look at what blueprint reading actually is. Because most people don't realize that mechanical drafting isn't just a good way to represent something. Mechanical drafting is a language, it's a way to communicate, and it's very important that whatever we do communicate in drafting is communicated quite clearly. The language that most people are used to, the spoken and written languages we use every day, well, are incredibly performant in describing complex situations. Because language does, before all else, simplify things and permit us to, within a few sentences, describe something that's very complex. A good example of that was if I were to say, and it's true, I love my wife. Well, that is a very complex thing. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of stuff going on there. But within a few words I can express something that most of humanity will understand. But what our written and spoken language can't do very well is describe physical entities with great detail. I can say something like, oh, that's a lovely building. And we all have a vague idea of what I'm talking about, but it doesn't at all describe the building that I might be looking at. Another example, let's take a simple part. Now here's a very simple gear. Now, I can show you this gear and you have a good idea of what it is, but you won't know its dimensions or its tolerances or its specifications. You'll just have a visual idea of what it looks like. So maybe I could be tempted to describe it in a written form or verbally, and if I were to do so, I would quite quickly discover that it becomes almost a nightmarish task. In reality, to describe this simple gear in language terms, it would take several pages and would be not just complex but very difficult to understand. And by the time we were done reading it, well, our chances of producing exactly the same thing, or what our client wants, would be pretty slim. Our chances of success are pretty slim because with complex text and complex language comes high probability of error. Because not only are the texts complex and hard to understand, they can be interpreted in different fashions. We all know that words mean different things to different people. And from one area to the next, things can get very confused. So what do we need? Well, we need another kind of language. Not a written or spoken language. Actually, we need a graphic language. And that's how it has to be seen. Mechanical drafting is a language. It's not a spoken or written language. It's a drawn language. And just like any other language, well, there's rules and ways of reading them. So it's important to learn how to read a blueprint because it's not a pictorial representation. It is an actual language. Now, to show just how important blueprint reading is, I usually do with my classes when I used to teach in front of a class, I used to do an exercise with a few students so that everyone could see how different graphic language can be from spoken or written language. It can be quite a shocker. And here's what I used to do. I'd get a deck of cards, a deck from which I'd pull a few cards. Here we have 4 cards, okay? And I'd get 2 sheets of paper, letter size. Now what I'm going to do here, what I would do normally, is dispose on one sheet of paper given to one of the students on a desk in front of him, the other student being at his back, so they're back to back, one can't see what the other's doing. And the first one would dispose on his sheet of paper the 4 cards, and the only stipulation was that the cards had to touch somewhere between themselves. Each card had to touch the next. And then I would ask the other student to dispose his or her 4 cards on his or her sheet of paper in the same fashion. In other words, so that it mimicked the first sheet with the cards on it. The problem being was that the second student could not see how the first student disposed the cards. And the only information the second student could receive were the verbal instructions of the first student, who could not see how the second student was disposing those cards. Now, since when we're reading a blueprint, we almost never have the person who drew the blueprint in the first place next to us to figure out what's going on, it's something that we have to read on our own without further instruction. So when doing this exercise, the second person who has to place their cards the same way the first one did can listen to the first person's instructions, but is not allowed to ask any questions. So let's dispose these cards. Now, once the cards were positioned, I'd ask the second student to position his or her cards depending on or as per the instructions of the first person in the team. And what do you think happened? Well, it was clear after only a few seconds that this was not going to go well. A confusion reigned, and after the allotted minute that they had to get through the task, well, the results were never good. Actually, I never seen any team complete this exercise properly. Take 2 was to redo the exercise, but this time the second person was allowed to ask questions. It was a little more successful, but not terribly. For take 3, I would permit a third person to come over to the team and sketch how the cards were positioned on the first piece of paper, and to pass that sketch over to the second person. Now, invariably, once that was done, the second person managed to produce the sketch or to reproduce the layout properly. Now, 4 cards positioned on a sheet of paper is not a very complex shape, but it is incredibly complex to describe verbally, especially when there's no feedback allowed. That demonstrates clearly the importance for a new way to communicate if we're going to be describing accurate and complex shapes. And that is what blueprint reading is all about. Blueprints aren't drawings. They are texts. They are something that need to be read. and they must be read properly. So let's take a look at this new language of mechanical blueprint reading. Now, lines are important. They're important in our lives and they're important in our language because lines is one of those words that means many things depending on how we use it. Like Johnny Cash, he walked the line. In another song, we're told to not hand me no lines, keep your hands to yourself. There's lines that you toe and lines that you're not supposed to cross. There really is all kinds of lines. But for us in mechanical drafting, well, there's several types of lines that are our basic alphabet. So let's start by getting to know our basic alphabet and our basic lines. We have our contour line, the first one up here. We have hidden lines, second one here. We have two here that are actually dimension lines, okay? The first here being my leader or my dimension line proper, and the second one here being my extension line. So both are dimension lines. This also could be considered as being a leader line. This line here, right here, that's a hidden line. This heavy line right here, that's a section line. And this bottom line here, this one here, well, that's a phantom line. So let's run through them once more, and this time we'll describe their properties. So let's head back up to the top. Our first line here is our contour line, and if we look at it and compare it to the others, we see that it's a solid and thick line. Now it's hard to do with a marker on this board, but it really should be double thickness to all the other lines except for this section line, which is about the same thickness. So it's a double thickness, a solid, continuous line, contour lines. Hidden lines are half the thickness of a contour line, and they are a dash line. So they are short dashes and equal. Now, again, I haven't done a very good job of drawing my dashes all evenly, but it is a dashed line and quite thin, light line. My dimensioning lines should be thin and continuous, and we'll have to take a closer look at how to use those, but thin and continuous. My center line is also a thin line, but it is a long dash, short dash, long dash, short dash, and so on, okay? And that's a center line. My section line here is a thick line, as thick as my contour line. And it ends with two arrowheads. So section lines always end with these arrowheads. And it's a double dashed line. So we can see that we have long dash, double short dash, long dash, double short dash, and so on. That is a section line. And finally down here, a phantom line, which is also a double dash line, but it does not finish with arrowheads, and it is much lighter than the section line. So my phantom line is long dash, double short dash, long dash, double short dash, long dash, double short dash, and so on. Now, we know the names of these lines, and we know how to describe them or what they look like. But what do they represent? And that's important. So let's run through them once again to see what each one of these types of lines represents. Now, of all these lines, only 3 of them actually have something to do with the shape of the part on the drawing. And that obviously is the contour line, the hidden line, and the phantom line. So 1, 2, and 3. The other lines in here have to do with dimensions or indicating things on the part. So let's start with the contour lines. Now, in 2D drafting, we don't show surfaces and we don't do shadowing. No, we show intersections and lines of sight. And we do that with contour lines. So the contour line really is the line that shows the outside shape of a part, and that's what it's used for. Now, if the contour line shows the outside shape of the part, well, the hidden line shows shapes that are hidden from view, things that are happening on the back or on the inside of a part. So if we have intersections or lines of sight on the inside that we cannot normally see from the outside, well, we'll be looking at those in a hidden line form. And the phantom line has to do with the shape of a part, but oddly enough, the phantom line shows the shape of a part or an entity on a part that doesn't exist or doesn't exist yet. It could be a different position for something on this part, or it could just be a cavity that hasn't been made at this point yet because it's something that will come much later in the fabrication process. So those are our three lines that have to do with the shapes of parts. The next one is the dimension lines, and that doesn't take too much imagination to figure out what they're for. They exist to help us indicate dimensions on the drawing and to know where or what those written dimensions relate to on the part. So they bring our dimension and bring the arrow-headed dimension down to the surface that we want to indicate. And that's my dimension lines. Center lines also doesn't require too much imagination. If I'm showing the center of a part, let's say the center of a cylindrical part, well, I can show that it is central and cylindrical in part with a center line. And these center lines indicate centers of holes, centers of cylindricity. But they can also indicate that something is even on both sides of this line, okay? So equality from one side to the other. And that all has to do with these center lines. And finally, this section line. Sometimes I want to be able to get into a part and see a detail on the inside, and I don't want to show it with hidden lines because it becomes confusing. Sometimes those internal entities are quite important. And when I have to get into a part and show it, well, I can section that part so that I can look into it. And that's what these section lines do. And that's why they have arrowheads, because the section line shows us what we'll be looking at in that projection, and the direction of the arrowhead shows us from which side we should be looking at it. So that's our basic lines. Now, let's go take a look at some drawings and run through these lines once again, but this time finding them and showing them on actual blueprints.
Here we have a single part, single view detailed drawing, and it's a drawing of our drill point gauge. If we take a closer look at the gauge itself, we can identify the different line types that make up this drawing. We can see that we have contour lines. We also have dimension lines and leaders. We have extension lines as well. And finally, we have center lines, which on this drawing show the center positions of holes. This drawing, however, doesn't have any hidden lines or section lines. So let's look at another drawing. Here we have a center alignment bar for lathe adjustment. And on this drawing, we do have a section line. In this case, it's section AA. We want to cut the part at AA visually so that we can see the details on the protected center hole. Now, these details are hard to make out on the drawing itself, and that's why it's so nice to have that detailed view, which is at a larger scale than the rest of the drawing. That makes the internal details of this part a lot easier to see. No more pesky hidden lines. It also gives us a lot more room for dimensioning. This drawing also has hidden lines, but they're not the easiest hidden lines to see. So let's take a look at another drawing. Here we have our hammer project detail drawing, and it's cram-packed with all kinds of lines, but we're looking for hidden lines. So here we have a nice, crisp, and clear set of hidden lines to show the hole in the hammer handle. we also have a center line, and in this case it's showing the center or cylindricity of the hammer handle. But as we've said before, center lines can also show symmetry. So here's an example of a center line that isn't on a cylindrical part. It really is just to show that the part is symmetrical about that line. Since we have the drawing here, let's just refresh our memories. Here we have some extension lines, some dimension lines, leader lines, and contour lines. All we need now is an example of some phantom lines, and phantom lines are pretty rare, and there aren't any on this drawing. So let's take a look at another print. Here we have a little injection molding project. Now, these blocks are the blocks that will become the mold, and they're standard for the little injection molder that we had. But the shape of the cavity was to be left to the student's creativity, and the sprue was to be drilled and reamed on assembly. So we showed those lines as phantom lines, since they weren't part of the initial project.
So lines are important because, as we've just seen, they're our basic alphabet, and if we can identify them easily and we remember right off the bat what they represent, well, it helps us to decode what the draft person is trying to show us. Now, lines are great, but lines aren't drawings, and drawings aren't just parts. There's disposition, there's views to be made, and there's projections. So let's take a look at all those things.
Here we have a single view drawing. It's a single view drawing because there's only one view. And there's only one view because this part is bidimensional. A shape is bidimensional when the third plane never changes, and in this case, the depth of the part always remains constant at 1/8 of an inch. Here we have a two-view drawing. Now we have a front view and a side view. This bottom detail section view is not part of the projection, so it can't be called a view. It's not a view because it's not at the same scale as the rest of the drawing, and it doesn't align with the other views. This part has a relatively simple shape, and two views are all that are required to show it in its entirety. Remember, the detail section view AA exists only to clarify things. Here we have a three-view drawing, and three views are required in this case to show the part in all its details. We see that all three views align one with the other, and that in this case the section view AA is part of the projection, and that means that it's part of the drawing's views. If I look at these views, I can say that this is the front view, and I can say that this is a side view. Right or left? I don't know. And I can also say that this is the bottom view. No, I can't. It could be the top view. Right or left, top or bottom, depends on the angle of projection.
And with that word, projections, well, I open Pandora's box. Because, I say views, front view, side view. Is it a right side? Is it a left side? Top view, bottom view, who knows? It all depends on the point of view. And that is what projection is all about. It's a point of view. Now, we have to, when we're drawing or when we're reading a drawing, perform intellectual gymnastics. And that is that we have to take views in 2 dimensions of a part and reassemble them in our mind to be a 3-dimensional part. And if we succeed to make that intellectual 3D image, well, it's in large part due to the fact that the person who produced the drawing did it in a way that I could understand. In other words, we're both on the same page. We know what we're looking at. what is the right side, what is the top, what is the bottom, and so on and so forth. Seems simple enough. The view that's on the right is the right side view. The view that's on the left is the left side view. The view that's on the top is the top side view, and the view that's on the bottom is the bottom side view. Well, that's not always true. In North America it is, but for many countries in the world who work at first angle projection, well, they don't look at it this way. The view that's on the right of a part on a print is the left-hand side. The view that's on the left is the right-hand side. The view that's on the top is the bottom view, and the view that's on the bottom, well, is the top view. And that's first angle projection. In North America, we work, and in several other countries, we work on third angle projection. And that means that the right side view is on the right, the left side view is on the left, the top's on the top, the bottom's on the bottom. That we understand because that's what we're used to. So why the difference? It's all a question of perception. And here's how it works. Now there's many ways of explaining first or third angle projections. And one that's often used is to imagine that your part is on a table and that you're looking at the part, but that there's a wall behind it, and you're going to gish this part up into the wall, and what you see there is your view. Now that would mean that your right side view is on the back wall, and if you were looking at it the other way, well, your left hand view would be on the other wall, and that is first angle projection. Pretty clear, right? And third angle projection, well, it's as if your part was in a glass box and you drew the sides of the part on each side of the box as you saw it, and then you opened the box like it had flaps, and what you'd see on the top would be a third angle projection. A little complex to understand. I by far prefer the bowl method. Now, to understand first or third angle projections with the bowl technique, well, all we have to know really is that in first angle projections, the bowl is upside down. And in third angle projections, the bowl is right side up. Now, we'll look at it in a little more detail, but before we do that, we have to determine what our face view or our front view is. Now the front view in a projection is the central view around which the top, bottom and side views project. And the front view should normally be the view of the part that reflects its shape the most clearly and that shows the most detail. Now if I look at this old 1, 2, 3 block, it's been milled and hardened but never ground. It's an old project that was never finished. Well, if I look at this shape from all sides, it's pretty clear to me that the side that represents the best the shape of this part is this side right here. When I look at the V and see the main V as a V, where I see the main hole as a round hole, and where I see most of the grooves as actual grooves. So this really represents best the shape of the part. And that'll be the side that I choose, or the view that I choose for my front view when we do our example. In order to learn the bowl technique, well, we use our bowl and we use our part, and we're going to deposit the part, this being the front view that we chose, in the bottom, so that if I look directly down at the part, I would see the front view that I chose. Now, that's my front view. If I push the part away from me, following the curve of the bowl, I'll end up here. And this is my top view. Push away, top view. Pull down, front view. Pull towards, bottom view. Bottom, front, top. Front. If I push to the left, I see the left-hand view. If I push to the right, I see the right-hand view. So let's look at that again. Push away, top view. Pull towards, bottom view. Push to the left, left-hand view. Push to the right, right-hand view. That is third angle projection. The bowl is upright. Now, for first angle projection, we're going to turn the bowl over. We're going to position our part in the center with my face view or my front view looking straight down at it here, as I did in the other example. But this time we're going to follow the contour in a different way. When I push this part away from me, it falls down to that side, and that is my bottom view because I'm looking at the bottom side. If I come back to my front view and pull it towards me, I see the top view, but it's at this side of my projection. So top view, front view, bottom view. If I go towards the left, I see the right hand side of the part. So if I push left, I see the right hand view. Front, if I push right, I see the left hand view. That is first angle projection. Now that's going to take some getting used to, but don't worry. You're either in one or the other. It's very rare that people, maybe except for Jim out in Greenland, it's very rare that people get to work regularly in both projections. In my life, I think I did 2 projects in first angle projection. Everything else I did was third angle, and I've done a lot of projects in my life. So, you know, if you're European, well, you're used to first angle, and that's probably what you're going to end up looking at most of the time. And in North America, well, it'll be third. But how do you know? Well, on a lot of drawings, if you're in an area where it's regularly the same projection, like third angle projection or first angle, well, there's often no indication on the drawing. People get lazy and they just don't put it because they always do the same thing. And why even worry about the other projection? Well, that's okay if you're used to that where you work, and that can work. But if not, well, there's a symbol that should be on the drawing that indicates first angle or third angle. And here are those symbols. Now, we've covered a lot of theory, and we have some more to cover, but this video is starting to get a little on the long side, so I think it's time to stop it here. This will be the end of the part 1 of the blueprint reading course, and we'll continue in our part 2. Now, just looking at how long this part 1 has become, well, I'm kind of guessing there's going to be a part 2 and definitely a part 3, and who knows, maybe even a part 4. We'll see how things go. So, in the meantime, have fun, be safe, and happy machining.